I like light. I like the sun to be up. I like to be able to see what I'm doing. I like to be able to see the world around me. Don't care much for the darkness. A lot of things happen in the darkness. People do things in the darkness when they don't want people to see what they're doing. You know, the Bible really talks a lot about light and dark, about that idea of good and evil, about Christ being a light and evil being darkness, or Satan being darkness. And sometimes I almost can feel the darkness around me at times, it seems. And it's overpowering, isn't it? Darkness can just engulf you. It can swallow you up, if you want to look at it that way. A small light in the darkness is tremendous. Even the smallest point of light, when it's totally dark, is tremendous. It can guide you home. I think that's something that, to me, in my life, I've always looked for those points of light, whether that be a person, or whether that be God, or whether that be a piece of Scripture. But whenever I kind of get down and I kind of get gloomy and I kind of get in those funks, I look for a point of light. You know, I don't know about you, but when I lay my head down at night, sometimes I get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and it seems kind of depressing, hopeless almost sometimes. I think about all the things I need to do and all the things I haven't done, and think about all the people I need to do something about, and I think about all the things that are wrong, and I think, how am I going to get through another day? I don't know if you've ever been there in your life, but you think, how am I going to get through the next day? And it's funny, because sometimes if you lay there till you see that sun coming up, it seems like when that sun comes up and comes through the window, it seems like a lot of those problems just evaporate. And it seems like that it's okay. When I was a kid, my grandmother, she used to haul me on this Greyhound bus. She didn't drive. And she would haul us kids all over the country on a Greyhound. If you've never traveled on a Greyhound bus, you just haven't lived. That's all I know to tell you. It's an experience all its own. And she would take us, and it would be the middle of the night, and we'd be in the middle of New Mexico or somewhere. And I'd always look for that sky to start, that little bit of light in the morning, you know, when you just see it. And pretty soon it just comes up and it just floods the whole earth, and it just makes things better. You know, in Genesis, the very first thing that God made was light. It doesn't say that he made the sun, interestingly, and I always thought that was kind of fascinating. It doesn't say he made the sun to come up. It doesn't say, and you know, we don't really get into the sun and moon until a little further down in the creation account. So I really don't know how he made light here. I don't know if that was the sun. I don't know if that was miraculous. I don't know if Christ was the light. Isn't that what John says, that Christ was the light? I don't know how that worked. But I know the very first thing that God did is he took away the darkness. Very first thing. Because you have to see what you're doing, don't you? You have to see that. And I don't think it's any mistake or accident in the Bible that Jesus becomes this light, doesn't he? He becomes this light that we look towards, that the world needs to look towards. This light in the middle of this darkness, this thing that leads us out and leads us to where we need to go, this pinpoint of light in a dark world that leads us in the right direction. You know, Jesus told him in Luke 22, and I think it's a real powerful illustration of what Christ was talking about. When he said, well, I was with you the other temple, you did not lay hands on me, but the hour and the power of darkness, Jesus says, are yours. You know, isn't it interesting that they didn't come to arrest Jesus in the daylight, when they could see him, when they could see who he was and where he was and what he was, but they did it in the night, didn't they? In the middle of the night, they took these soldiers and they took these torches, and it wasn't like today, and it was dark out, and I don't know if there was a moon out or not, or the stars out, I don't know, but they took these torches and they couldn't really see, and they went up to this mountain and they found Jesus. And Judas kissed him, because how else would you even know in the darkness that it was Christ. And Jesus says the power of darkness are yours. Is there power in the darkness? Is there power in evil? Sure there is. And Christ understood that. And he understood that that's where he was at that particular time, that power of darkness was coming upon him. In Matthew 4, he says, leaving Nazareth, and came and settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. And there was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who were sitting in darkness saw a great light, and those who were sitting in the land in shadow of death, upon them a light dawned. From that time, Jesus began to preach and say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's a statement from the prophet Isaiah that said that Jesus was the great light. Jesus was a light that was going to lead these people, going to lead these Jews, going to lead everybody out of the darkness that we were in. And if you look at Isaiah chapter 9, it says, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light, and those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. You shall multiply the nation, you shall increase their gladness. They will be glad in your presence as with the gladness of harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For you shall break the yoke of their burden and the staff on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, as at the battle of Midian. For every boot of the booted warrior in the battle tumult and cloak rolled in blood will be for burning, fuel for fire. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. You know, it's a time of year we look towards the birth, don't we? The birth of Jesus, the birth of Christ. And how did we know about the birth? It was a light in the sky, a star, a miraculous star that guided the wise men to the place where Jesus lay. It was no ordinary star. It was not part of astronomy. It was miraculous because it went over the manger. It went over the place. And the interesting thing about that star, about that light, is that it guided the wise men to Jesus, and the wise men didn't make it to Jesus until maybe 2 to 4 years after his birth. You know, this wasn't just a light or a star that appeared on that one night and showed up and went to where Jesus was, and they rushed, they jumped in their Lear jet and they rushed to find it, right? These guys came from the Middle East. These guys are probably Persians. They came on camels. Have you ever rode a camel? It's not fast, right? They came on camels from Persia all the way to where Jesus was, and all the way they saw his light, and that's what they said, his light in the sky. And when they came to that region of the world, and when they came to there, Herod said, where was this child to be born? And the scribes looked in the book, and they said in the book of Micah, right, Micah 5, and he said it would be Bethlehem. This child would be born in Bethlehem. And so the wise men went to Bethlehem and found, the scripture says, the young child in the house. They didn't find a babe in a manger, because years had passed by that time. They found a young child in a house. And they went there and they worshiped him, and they gave him the 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And the fascinating part of that is then the angel of the Lord came to Joseph and said, take the child and flee into Egypt, for he's after the child's life. And have you ever thought that God gave them gold, frankincense, and myrrh? He gave them the means to leave Bethlehem and go to Judea just at the time that Herod was going to seek the child's life and they needed to flee. And he gave them these precious things and this money so they could go on this journey and go to Egypt and stay there until it was safe to go back to Nazareth, and God provided for them. But it was the light in the sky that led them to him. It was the light in the sky. So when you read Isaiah, and it says that this light will come, and this light will be something that's going to change things, and is going to change the world and change religion and change government and change all these things. We see this in Jesus Christ, who was born, and the light that said he's coming. In John 1, it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. You know, it's interesting in John, because if you read the first part of this passage in John, right, in the Gospel of John chapter 1, it said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, And the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and nothing was created that was not created through him. And then we get into this thing, and it says that he was the light. And you remember the first thing we read in Genesis? It said, God said, let there be light. And Jesus hears that light, and Jesus was in creation, and Jesus was in the beginning. And then John goes on to say that he was alive, and he was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not comprehend the light, did it? And because of that, they hung Jesus on a cross. But it gives you this illustration of the difference, this thing we go between light and darkness. And John 3:19 through 21 says this, the judgment that the light has come into the world, and men love the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. For he who practices the truth comes to the light so that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought in God. You know how to know if somebody practices the truth? Because they don't care for people to look at their life, do they? They don't care for people to examine them. They don't care to be put underneath a microscope and for people to look at how they live and how they speak and who they are, because they have nothing to be ashamed of. It's the people who hide in the shadows, who hide in the darkness. It's those people who do those evil things that don't want to be seen, that hide in those places. You know, today we have a thing called the dark web, don't we? You know why it's the dark web? Because people don't want to see what goes on there, right? I mean, I don't even know how to get to it, but they say it exists. I have no idea. But they say it exists. And the reason I can't find it is because I don't want to find it, because I don't want to go to the dark. Do you? You know, the truth of all this is that people who want to hide something find a way to hide it, don't they? They hide it in 100 or 1,000 different ways to keep it from being seen. And yet God and Jesus sees all things that we do, regardless of what that may be. It's sad when someone says they walk in the light, and yet we know they hide things, and they have darkness within them or darkness in their life. If you really want to be true, then you need to let your life be manifested before men and in the eyes of God. We need to look towards the light that Jesus is to guide us on the way that we should go. Been in a cave. You ever been in one of them caves and they take you down the bottom of the cave and they shut the light off? You ever been there? And they say, and it's totally darkness, isn't it? Can't see anything, not a single solitary thing. And I had a cave guide tell me one time, I don't know if it's true, I don't know much about it, but he told me, he says, if they left you down there without that light for several days, that you would lose your vision. You'd never be able to see again. You know, when I think about that, isn't that kind of what happens to people? When they do things that are evil and they walk in the darkness, eventually what happens? Eventually their vision becomes clouded, doesn't it? What they do is okay. They justify it. And when they do that, how tragic is that? Because they don't even see what they need. They don't even see the light, do they? Jesus in John 8, he said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness. You know, have you ever walked at night with a flashlight? You don't shine it behind you, do you? Because you don't want to see where you've been. You want to see where you're going. And that's the way it is with Jesus. He's a light that leads us, that guides us, that keeps us from stumbling. We shine that light so we don't stumble, so we don't fall, so we don't step on something that we shouldn't step on or step into something that we shouldn't step into, right? We do that because we need to see. And that's what Jesus is for a Christian. He's the light that we shine before us. He leads us in the way that we should go. He leads us. We follow him. As sheep follow a shepherd, so we follow Christ. His light leads us in the path of righteousness, in the way that we should go. And he does that because we follow his word and we know his word. It says here, I am the light. You won't walk in darkness, but you will have the light. Jesus says, the light of life. You know, you and I need to keep a vision. We need to keep our eyes upon that and our eyes upon Christ. We need to fill ourselves with that light. In Matthew 6, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, the eye is the lamp of the body. It's really an interesting passage. I've looked at it a lot because in some ways it makes no sense. We know that if our eye is bad, but we know what Jesus is saying here, right? It's just like I said, if you're in that darkness long enough, you can't see anymore. I know people like that. I know people who have walked in the darkness for so long, whether it be addiction or whether it be whatever it is in their life, that they can't see the light anymore. To them, it's just darkness. To them, their life's okay. They don't look for Christ. They don't look for light. They don't want to anymore. Their life has become that. And that's what Jesus is saying in Matthew 6. He says, if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If you refuse to look for the light, if you refuse to follow Christ, if you refuse to do what Jesus says to do, eventually you'll succumb to it. That will be who you are. It'll be what you are. And that's a sad place to be. But Jesus said, if the light is in you and is darkness, see what he says? Eventually we confuse it, don't we? We confuse the darkness for the light. We confuse the bad for the good. We make excuses. We make all kinds of excuses. We justify our actions. We say it's all right. We say we're all right. We do things we shouldn't do, and we say that it's okay because everybody does it. And we say it's okay because nobody will see us, or maybe nobody will care if we do something that's wrong. We forget that Jesus sees all these things, doesn't he? We forget that he's always there looking. And eventually, when we do it long enough and nothing ever happens and we never get caught, Satan's greatest tool, his greatest tool is basically just to let us fall on our own inaction, isn't it? To let us just go our own way, to let us become what the world would have us become. But yet that's not who we're called to be. We're called to look towards Christ, to look towards he is, not to succumb to the darkness that surrounds us. Brethren, in Matthew, the beginning of that, Matthew 5, what does Jesus say? He says, you are the light of the world. Isn't that what he says? You are a light of the world. And nobody takes a light and puts it under a basket, but they put it on a lampstand so that all the world can see it. You know, for the world that's in darkness, for a world that's in sin, we are the light. We are the people that the world should look towards and say, that's what I want. That's what I want to have. I want to be like that. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, Jesus says, right? You are the salt of the earth. And if a salt has become tasteless, how can it be made to be salty again? He's telling you what he's saying here. We are the light of the world to the darkness. We are the spot of light in a dark world that people should be able to see. And if we're not that, then we're not being who Jesus would have us to be. Let your light shine. Let Jesus shine in your life. Let people know that even though we live in an evil world, and even though we live in a bad world, and even though we live in a world where a lot of bad things happen, there's a way out of that darkness. There's a way out of addiction. There's a way out of all of these things that trap us in our life. There's a way out. And Jesus is that way, and we need to let the world know that there's a way out of the darkness. We need to be a light to somebody in our life that's lost in a world of darkness. There's a way out, and Jesus is the way, and we need to let people know that. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known as we stand.